I've always found comfort in routine. Every morning, I'd wake at the same time, 6 a.m. sharp. No alarm needed. My body just knew. I'd shuffle into the kitchen, make a pot of strong black coffee, and watch the mist roll through the woods outside my window. It was my quiet ritual, my shield against the chaos of the world. Ever since my divorce 6 months ago, I'd clung to that structure like a lifeline. The house, old and weather-worn, might have creaked and groaned under its own age, but it was mine. And more importantly, it was quiet, peaceful. Predictable dot that morning shattered everything. I remember it so vividly, the chill in the air when I stepped out of bed. Colder than usual. The house was silent, but not in the soothing way I was used to. It felt off. Like something had inhaled and was holding its breath, waiting. I rubbed my arms and stepped into the hallway barefoot. That's when I saw them footprints, wet, muddy, leading straight from the front door to my bedroom. I stopped cold, staring at them. My brain struggled to register what I was seeing. The floor, which I cleaned religiously every day, without fail, was smeared with dark, glistening mud. The prints weren't mine. They couldn't be. They were large, wider, and longer than my own feet, and spaced in a way that suggested a heavy, deliberate gait. Some even looked like the mud had pooled inside them, as though whatever made them had been soaked through. I stood there for a long moment, heart starting to thump in my chest. I hadn't had visitors in months, and the front door had been locked. I was sure of it. I always double-checked it before bed. It's part of my routine. One of those little things that made me feel in control. Still trying to make sense of it, I padded toward the door. The lock was still engaged. Deadbolt too. No signs of forced entry. Nothing broken. No open windows. Just footprints. I must have tracked it in somehow, I told myself. Maybe I stepped outside without realizing. Maybe I'd gone out to check. Something last night and forgot to wipe my feet, maybe. But deep down, I already knew better. Still, I grabbed the mop and bucket and set to work, erasing the trail with more force than necessary. My hands were shaking as I cleaned, but I convinced myself it was just stress. Maybe I needed more sleep. Maybe I was slipping. Grief does things to people, I reasoned. Living alone warps your mind. You start imagining things. But even as I scrubbed, one thought looped endlessly in my head. No matter how hard I tried to suppress it, the door was locked. The prints had come from inside. I didn't sleep well that night. Every little sound seemed amplified. The groan of the old pipes, the creak of settling wood, even the wind brushing against the window. All of it made me flinch. I told myself it was just paranoia. The footprints were a one-off. A fluke. Something I could explain if I dug deep enough into logic. But deep down, I already knew the truth. When I got out of bed the next morning, my body felt heavy, my limbs aching with the weight of restless sleep. I walked to the kitchen without looking. Down at first, just focused on the smell of coffee brewing. Hoping it would bring a sense of normalcy, then I saw them again, new footprints. Fresh, still wet, still muddy. They stretched from the front door again, winding their way down the hallway past the living room, and this time, they stopped directly in front of my bedroom door. I froze. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The prints weren't smudged like the last ones. These were clearer, more purposeful, as if something had stood just outside my room, watching, waiting. I slowly crouched down and studied them closer. The shape was off wrong. The toes were too wide, too rounded. There was no distinct tread pattern like a boot or shoe would leave. And they weren't bare feet either. Not human ones, at least. They looked swollen, warped somehow, like the skin was soft, waterlogged. It wasn't a prank. No one had come in here while I slept. The locks were still sealed tight. The windows, all latched. No glass was broken. Nothing was out of place. Except those damn prints. I tried to stay calm. Told myself I needed proof before I started unraveling. If I called the cops now, what would I even say? That wet footprints were appearing in my house, but no one was. Breaking in? That something invisible might be creeping around my home while I slept. No, I needed something solid, tangible, evidence. I spent the rest of that day checking the entire house, inch by inch. I inspected every window, tested every lock. Everything was secure. I even checked the attic. The crawl space, anywhere something or someone could hide. Nothing. The house was clean. Empty. But the feeling hadn't gone. That pressure in the air, that strange silence between sounds, like the house was waiting for something to happen. Later that evening, a thought came to me, one of those desperate, maybe it'll work ideas born out of panic. I remembered reading somewhere about using flour to catch movements, detect trespassers. You spread it across the floor and wait. If anything steps in it, it'll leave a marked dot, so that's what I did. I went to the pantry and grabbed the big bag of flour, kept tucked behind the rice and pasta. I poured it slowly, carefully, across the floor by the front door. A thick, even line, no gaps. I extended it into the hallway, made sure it couldn't be stepped over easily. If anything passed through there tonight, I'd know. I'd see it. If you're real, I whispered to the empty room, my voice shaking, then leave a trace. I didn't realize I was trembling until I sat down. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. That night, I didn't sleep in bed. I sat on the couch with all the lights on, staring at the front door, ears tuned to every noise. And around 2:30 a.m., I heard it, a faint, wet slosh. Not the drip of a faucet or the creak of pipes. It was the sound of something moving, heavy, damp, like soaked fabric dragging across tile. It passed through the hallway slowly, deliberately, but I couldn't move. Couldn't even breathe. I sat there frozen, eyes wide, staring at the corner of the room where the sound had disappeared, into the shadows. After that, nothing. Just silence. When I finally drifted into a shallow, haunted sleep. The last thing I saw was the edge of the flower trail undisturbed. Pure white under the hallway light dot or so, I thought. I didn't want to get up the next morning dot after the sounds I'd heard wet. Dragging footsteps sliding across my floor in the dead of night. I wasn't sure I wanted to know what I'd find. But the sun was already bleeding through the curtains, lighting up the hallway with a soft golden glow. And eventually, I couldn't avoid it anymore. I dragged myself out of bed, nerves twisted into knots, and padded toward the front hallway. The flower was still there, dot untouched, dot pristine, dot the thick layer I'd carefully poured the night before lay smooth and uninterrupted across the floor. Not a single mark. No smear. No footprint. Nothing. But the muddy ones were back again. Not in the flower. No, but everywhere else. Fresh. Still wet. Still glistening in the morning light. They started just past the flower line in the center of the hallway and stretched all the way to my bedroom door. This time, one of the prints was pressed against the wood of my door itself. A handprint, damp, slimy, as if something had leaned in. Listened, watched, I stood there in stunned silence. The realization creeping over me, like frostbite, it hadn't come through the door, it hadn't passed over the flower, it had appeared inside the house. Past all the locks, past all the cameras, past my traps, inside. Already there, my stomach turned. I backed away slowly, like one wrong move might alert it, whatever it was. I couldn't keep pretending this was something normal. I'd ruled out intruders, sleepwalking, faulty locks, pranks. I was past all that. Something was in my home, and it wasn't human. But still I needed proof. Real proof. I couldn't just run to someone and say, my house is haunted by invisible, muddy footprints. No one would believe me. Hell, I barely believed myself, So I grabbed my keys and went straight into town. I bought the first security camera I could find, a cheap motion-activated model, but it would have to do. I brought it home, ripped open the box, and set it up in the hallway, where the prints always appeared. It pointed straight at the front door and the flower line I'd left untouched. I even added more flower, extending it across the living room now. A bigger trap. I checked the time, 8:22 p.m. Then I sat on the couch, camera active, eyes red, and waiting again. The hours passed in silence, a silence so thick it rang in my ears. I didn't move. I barely blinked. At some point, maybe around 2 a.m., I must have nodded off. Just for a second. But when I opened my eyes again, it was morning bright. Cloud-filtered light streamed into the blinds. I jolted upright, instantly sick with dread. Had I missed it? I sprinted to the hallway. The footprints were there, and they were everywhere. Across the floor, along the walls, smudged along the hallway closet. Some even crept toward the bathroom. Door this time and back, as if it had wandered freely around my house while I slept less than 10 feet away. I nearly dropped the camera in my hands. My fingers were numb as I pulled up the footage. The motion sensor had triggered just once at 3:30 a.m. I watched closely. The feed was perfectly clear, showing the empty hallway, the front door, the flower-covered floor. Then, just before 3:13, the image distorted. A flicker, a soft glitch in the frame, like static crawling across the screen. Then black, completely black for 8 seconds. When the image returned, the prints were there, dozens of them, stretching into the hallway like they'd loomed from the floor itself. No sound. No movement. No person. Just footprints, appearing from nothing. I watched the footage 5 times. 10 more. I rewound, paused, zoomed in. But there was nothing to see, nothing that explained it. No broken glass, no shape entering from the edges of the frame, just a black void swallowing the footage. And then the footprints. Something had come into my house again. And the camera hadn't caught it. It caught its absence. And that was worse, because it meant whatever was doing this didn't need a door, or a window, or a crack in the wall. It came from somewhere else, and it knew I was watching. I must have sat staring at the final frame of that footage for over an hour, barely breathing. The flower was there, the hallway was clear, then static, blackness. And when the video returned, the prints were there, already fully formed, as if they had appeared all at once. No entry, no transition. No logic. Something was slipping into my world without passing through any physical point of entry. And now, I was starting to suspect it wasn't just wandering. It had a destination in mind. I stood up slowly, my body stiff and cold. The prints this time weren't like the others. They weren't as neat, as orderly. They didn't simply lead from the front door to my room like a visitor walking in a straight line. This time, they zigzagged across the hallway, doubled back, curved against the walls, almost as if searching. They passed the hallway closet, stopped, curled around the baseboards, brushed up along the doorframe like fingers dragging across skin, then continued toward the end of the hall, toward a door I rarely even looked at, the basement. A sick wave of dread washed over me. I don't use the basement. It was there when I bought the house, a cold, unfinished cavern of stone and mildew that the previous owner used for storage. I'd left it mostly untouched, save for stacking a few old boxes down there. The door had remained locked ever since I moved in. It was just a habit, I guess. That kind of space didn't feel like part of the house. It felt like somewhere else. Now, the prints led directly to it. I stepped closer. The muddy trail darkened at the base of the basement door. One print had smeared against it, like something had leaned on it, pressed its weight into the wood. I couldn't ignore it anymore. If there were answers, they were down there. I went to the kitchen and took the largest knife I owned. My hand was shaking as I wrapped my fingers around the hilt. I returned to the hallway, stood in front of the basement door, and stared at the handle. It was locked, still locked. That somehow made it worse. I fished out the key from the junk drawer, inserted it slowly. It clicked. I opened the door. The smell hit me immediately. Damp earth and rot, like something buried beneath a flood. I flicked the wall switch, but the light didn't come on. Of course it didn't. I reached for my flashlight. Instead, and slowly descended the creaking wooden steps. Each one groaning beneath my weight. The temperature dropped with each step. The air was thick and wet, clinging to my skin like a fog. I swept the flashlight across the concrete floor. Boxes, stacked, furniture, dust, cobwebs. Nothing unusual at first. Then the beam caught something. A footprint. 1, Single, fresh muddy. Footprint in the middle of the floor. Far from the stairs. Too far. Too large. Thought it was like it had been left there by something that had simply manifested in the center of the room, rather than walked in. I approached, flashlight trembling. The closer I got, the more I felt it. A presence. Like I wasn't alone. Like something was just out of reach, just beyond the light, watching me from the edge of shadow. Then I heard it. A sound. A whisper. Thought it wasn't loud. Wasn't clear. It sounded like a word. Maybe my name. Maybe something worse. It drifted across the basement like smoke. Low, hissing, impossible. I spun around, flashlight darting through the dark. Nothing. But the whisper came again and again. Doubted. Was circling me. I could feel it. The air pressed against my skin. Heavy, suffocating. I backed away, heart hammering, until I reached the stairs again. I didn't run, not at first. I was afraid if I ran, it would chase me, but then the light flickered, once, twice, then went out. And I bolted up the steps, slammed the door shut, locked it, and fell to the floor gasping. I stayed there, panting, listening, and I heard it again, a whisper, just on the other side of the door, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't, not after what I heard down there. Not after that whisper. I sat with my back pressed against the basement door, the knife still in my grip. The flashlight on and clutched like a lifeline in my other hand. Every so often, I thought I heard something, a shifting of weight behind the door. The groan of wood under strain, like something pacing just beyond reach. The sun finally rose, but the gray light filtering through the windows brought no comfort. I waited until the morning was fully in bloom before I dared to move. I left the house. I drove. No destination. Just turned onto the main road and kept going. I passed diners, gas stations, strip malls. None of it registered. All I could see was that single footprint in the basement huge. Heavy, intentional when I finally calmed down enough to think. I realized I couldn't keep doing this. Living in fear. Ignoring whatever was clearly escalating. I thought about going to the police again. But what would I say? That there were muddy prints in my house and a whispering thing in my basement that didn't show up on camera? They'd call for a wellness check, not a detective. I drove to a hardware store instead. Bought deadbolts, screws, flashlights, extra, batteries. Then I added a motion detector and a baby monitor on impulse. I didn't even know how to use half the stuff I bought. I just needed to feel like I was doing something. When I got home, the house felt off, like I had been gone too long and it had noticed. I went to the basement door first. The lock was still in place, untouched, but I could feel something behind it. Something silent, still, listening. I installed the extra locks anyway. I bolted that door like it was holding back the ocean god, but that night, the real horror began. The power went out around midnight. I was lying in bed, watching shadows play on the ceiling from the dim glow of my emergency flashlight, when everything just clicked off. Silence. Then a low, steady creak from below. Footsteps. But this time, they weren't in the basement. They were inside the walls. It started in the floor beneath me. Slow drag, like wet feet sliding across wood. Then it moved to the wall beside my bed. I heard a faint, rhythmic thumping, almost like a heartbeat, followed by a deep inhale like something was sniffing the air just inches from where I lay. I froze. I didn't dare move. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. The thing in the walls stopped. Then. It knocked. 3 slow, heavy knocks, right behind the drywall, as if to say, I know you're there. I leapt out of bed, flashlight in hand, and backed into the hallway. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure it could hear me. The knocks followed, me moving from room to room, always behind the wall I was nearest to. When I entered the kitchen, it was already there. When I moved to the bathroom, the knock came from the tiles. I was being herded, finally. I ran for the front door. I tried to open it. It didn't budge. It wasn't just locked. It felt like it had been sealed shut, glued, or worse. like someone was holding it from the outside. Then I heard the softest sound yet, dripping. I turned. And in the beam of my flashlight, I saw the trail again, muddy, wet footprints, fresh. Glistening right behind me, there was no time to think. I smashed the window with a chair. Not caring about the noise, not caring about the glass cutting into my arms and legs. I dove out, hit the cold earth, and ran barefoot across my lawn until I collapsed by the mailbox. I didn't look back. Not until I was in my car, and even then, I almost wish I hadn't, because standing in the broken window, half shrouded in darkness, was a figure not tall, motionless. Its skin was gray and slick, like it had been dragged from a river, and its eyes, if they were even eyes, reflected nothing. Just empty sockets that seemed to pull in the light around them. It didn't move. It just watched me leave. I left everything behind. The house, my clothes, my tools. Hell, even my phone charger was still plugged into the wall. None of it mattered anymore. I drove until the trees turned into city lights, until the memory of that house blurred into the distance behind me. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being followed. I checked into a cheap motel in the city. One of those places with flickering signs and cigarette burns in the comforter. It didn't matter, I just needed 4 walls that didn't breathe, didn't whisper. That first night, I barely slept. I kept waiting to hear that wet dragging sound again, that steady thump in the walls. But the room stayed silent. For the first time in days, I thought maybe it was over. I found an apartment 2 days later. Small unit on the 2nd floor of an aging complex on the edge of downtown. It wasn't much, but it felt alive. It had neighbors, traffic outside, a laundromat below. Life, noise, distractions. I surrounded myself with it. Convinced that whatever had been in my house couldn't follow me here. Couldn't survive the city. And for a while I worked. 3 nights passed. Then a week. No footprints. No whispering. No camera glitches. I even started sleeping with the lights off again. But on the 10th night, it returned. It was subtle, almost like a test. I woke up around 3 a.m., heart racing for no reason. The room was quiet, still, but I knew something was wrong. I could feel it in the air, that cold, damp heaviness that didn't belong. I climbed out of bed and tiptoed to the door. There, on the worn carpet just outside my room, was a single wet footprint. It hadn't come from inside. It had come from the hallway. I didn't scream. I didn't panic. I just stared, numb, as the moisture began to seep into the carpet fibers. I dropped to my knees and touched it. Got still warm. The thing had found me. The next morning. I requested to move apartments, told the manager someone had broken in. He looked skeptical, but offered me a unit on the other side of the complex. I packed immediately, but even as I did, I found myself checking the corners of every room, peeking behind doors. Watching the floor. The second apartment brought no relief. Too. Nights in, I found smudges on the window glass, like the outline of a hand, but it was too large. The fingers were unnaturally long, like they had been dragged across the glass rather than pressed against it. I tried burning sage. I tried prayers even though I wasn't religious. I talked to a local psychic who told me in hushed tones that something ancient had attached itself to me, that I had let it in, that it wasn't the house, it was me. I stopped sleeping. I watched the door every night. I piled salt in front of it, left the lights on, kept the camera running. None of it worked. The final sign came 3 nights ago. I was sitting in my tiny living room, dozing in and out, when I heard the sound again, that wet, dragging footfall, slow and deliberate. I jolted upright and stared at the hallway. Nothing. But when I looked down, they were there. Footprints, fresh, wet, leading not from the front door, but from inside the hallway, as if the thing had been there all along. Just waiting. The trail didn't stop this time. It led to the chair across from mine. Empty. Waiting. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke, I was on the floor, my neck aching, mouth dry. The chair was still empty, but on the floor next to me, in the same shimmering trail of moisture, were new print small ones, child-sized, as if something else had joined it. Or maybe it was changing. Splitting dot multiplying dot now. I sit in my apartment. Lights on. Every door locked, and every camera I own pointed at the corners of the room. But I can feel them. Behind the walls. In the vents. Beneath the floorboards, it doesn't matter where I go. They always find me. The footprints are not just marks on the floor anymore. They are messages. They are reminders. And tonight, I think they'll stop waiting. Because this time, they've started leading to me. And there's nowhere left to run.